Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the initial episode of the Holy Cross Podcast. I'm Father John Mazingo, and I'm really glad that you're here with me today. We've got an inspiring topic to dive into, and one that was shared at Holy Cross Anglican Church this morning. We're talking about finding strength in our weaknesses and embracing the thorns in our lives. So let's get started. So I want to kick things off with a personal story. So there was a time in my life when I was faced with a challenge that was so big, it felt like I was being crushed under the weight of it all. And I tried everything I could think of to get through it, but you know what? Nothing worked. It was like I was at my wit's end, and I was feeling completely defeated. Then in that moment of utter weakness, something incredible happened. Amidst the darkness, I felt an overwhelming presence. It was God's strength and God's grace lifting me up and carrying me through this storm. It was as if a mighty hand had reached down and pulled me from the depths of my despair. And that, my friend, was nothing short of miraculous, because it became a true turning point in my life. Now, here's the most amazing part. What happened to me, well, this can happen to you too. You see, when we're at our lowest, God's power can transform our lives in ways that we never imagined. Because, see, that life-changing moment taught me that in our weakest moments, we are poised to witness the greatest displays of God's strength. And today I want to share that hope and that promise with you. So this morning we dived into a powerful message from Paul's letter to the Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul reveals a profound truth which reads, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Friends, this verse is a game changer in life. This verse tells us that in our weakest moments, God's strength is at its greatest. Just look at Paul's experience with his own thorn in the flesh. In 2 Corinthians 12, Paul talks about an extraordinary vision and revelation from our Lord God. But despite these incredible experiences, Paul was given a thorn in the flesh to keep him grounded and reliant on God. You see, this thorn wasn't just a minor inconvenience. No, it was a persistent challenge, a constant reminder of his human limitations. Yet instead of removing the thorn, what did God do? He said, "Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness." So, what does this mean? What is the teaching point for us? How does it relate to me, you might ask? Well, Paul's thorn had a purpose. It kept him humble. It kept him dependent on God's strength rather than his own abilities. Now, Paul begged and begged and begged God to take it away. But God's purpose was clear. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." In other words, God was telling Paul, "I've got this. My strength will shine through your weakness." That's what he meant. Now here's where things get exciting. God's power is most evident when we are at our weakest. Our weaknesses create opportunities for God's strength to be displayed in all its glory. You see, when we're self-sufficient, we might forget our need for God, but when we are in our weakness, we are reminded of our dependence on Him. You see, it's in these moments of vulnerability that God's power can truly shine. Grace is God's unmerited favor towards us. It's His loving kindness and mercy given to us, not because we deserve it, but because of His great love for us. And here's the best part. God's grace is more than enough to sustain us in our times of weakness. When we feel inadequate or overwhelmed, God's grace meets us where we are and gives us the strength that we need to persevere. You see, God just does that for us. Now, We all have our own thorns or areas of weakness or struggle. I know you've got yours because I surely have mine. Maybe it's a physical ailment, or maybe it's an emotional burden, or a spiritual challenge. Either way, these thorns remind us of our humanity and our need for God. But guess what? We can embrace these weaknesses and turn them into strengths by relying on God. Consider this. Here are some ways that we can rely on God's strength each and every day. Number one, start each day with prayer. Ask God for His guidance and strength. Number two, meditate on scriptures that remind us of God's power and promises. Number three, share our struggles with a trusted friend or mentor who can pray with us and support us. And number four, practice gratitude, focusing on the ways that God has provided for us in the past. Now, prayer is our lifeline to God. It's through prayer that we can pour our hearts out to Him and receive His strength and comfort. You know, Paul's perspective on his own thorn changed when he understood that God's grace was sufficient. He found contentment in his weaknesses because he knew that God was with him and that His power was at work. Now, just like Paul, we too can find peace and joy in our weaknesses. But trusting in God's promises, we can embrace our weakness and rely on God's strength. We can experience His power and His presence in profound ways. This story and this teaching point just means so much to me because, you know, everybody has things that they deal with. And everybody has problems that keep them from doing what they think is right. Let me tell you a story about Joni Eareckson Tada. See, Joni, she's a well-known Christian author. She's also a speaker and an advocate for people with disabilities. Now, when she was just 17 years old, a diving accident left her paralyzed from the shoulders down. And in the years following her accident, Joni experienced deep depression. She had severe anger, and she had impossible doubt. She struggled to understand why is it that God had allowed this thing to happen to her. But see this, through her journey, Joni discovered a profound truth. Despite her physical weakness, she found incredible strength in God's grace. You know, she often quotes 2 Corinthians 12:9, saying that it has been a cornerstone of her faith. Joni has said, God's power always shows up best in weakness. So instead of letting her disabilities define her limits, Joni allowed God to use her situation to demonstrate His strength and His love. So where's Joni at today? Well, currently Joni's an author of numerous books. She's a well-known speaker, and she's the founder of Joni and Friends, which is an organization that provides support and resources to people with disabilities around the world. Now, her life is a testament to how God's strength can shine through our weaknesses and how His grace is indeed sufficient for us. So as we reflect on today's message, let us remember that God's grace is sufficient for us. His power is made perfect in our weakness, and we can find contentment in Him despite our struggles. I challenge each and every one of you to embrace your weaknesses and rely on God's strengths. Let's trust in His grace and allow His power to work through us. Well, thank you for joining us on this initial episode of the Holy Cross Podcast. Remember, God's strength is made perfect in your weakness. Embrace His grace and let His power transform your life. Now, if you want to hear more messages like this, I welcome you to visit our worship service on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. in Winterville, North Carolina. Find us on the web at www.holycross-anglicanchurch.com. Until next time, blessings to you and your family.